First Nation and Native American Reservation Sightings, Part 6. Pine Ridge, Oglala Sioux. Among those reporting encounters with the Quiet Ones are the Oglala Sioux of the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. The reservation encompasses the entirety of Shannon County, the southern half of Jackson County, and the northwest portion of Bennett County, an area larger than the states of Delaware and Rhode Island combined. Much has been written about the existence of the Quiet Man in the Grassy Plains region. We would have no knowledge of it without the helpful cooperation of the indigenous people who live alongside the Bigfoot on those prairie reserves. On August 1st of 2006, it was widely reported that a hairy man had been shot to death near Slim Butte, and the body was being studied somewhere on campus at South Dakota School of Mines and Technology, an engineering and science university in Rapid City, South Dakota. It may be that the editor published this report on April Fool's Day to absolve himself of any ridicule the incident might bring. Skeptical editors can be thin-skinned. Of serious note, the report stated the body was supposedly seen and given a smudging ceremony by 3 Lakota elders, including Wilmer Mesteth and Oliver Red Cloud. Mesteth loudly proclaimed by phone that it was a bunch of baloney. But was it baloney? On August 17, 2006, the tribe's chief of police, Twiss, wrote this report in part. My name is James Twiss. I am a police officer on the Pine Ridge Reservation. I am passing on information regarding the rash of sightings of a tall man or Bigfoot on the Pine Ridge Reservation. During one of these sightings, I had our department's thermal imaging camera and along with about 6 other officers did in fact pick up a large heat signature on the camera. Unfortunately, we don't have a recorder yet for the cameras, so we weren't able to record it. We did watch as it moved away from us down a gully, and it was missed by the other officers as they tried to find it using their flashlights. It is hard to explain as it must have already been past the officers before they arrived on scene. We watched it go into the creek area which runs through town. We heard a flurry of dogs barking but weren't able to locate it. Also, to set the record straight, the first 2 sightings that were called in reported a tall man, 10 to 15 feet tall, who appeared to be wearing a stovepipe hat and long coat. It was reported to be peeking into an apartment complex commons room where there were several witnesses. This is strange, as in the early 1980s, my brother was a police officer and responded to a call with another officer in the county, 35 miles northeast of Pine Ridge, and when they arrived, the family was in the living room with their dogs and had turned their furniture into a fort in the living room and was armed with knives and whatever else they could find. They advised that they had heard their dogs running into their front door, and when they opened it, the dogs ran in and were scared. The family reported seeing a large man. His hips were above the roof of their family car, wearing a stovepipe hat and had on a long coat. My brother and the other police officers went outside where the man was reported to be and saw that the light layer of ice was broken and the mud was disturbed where something had moved towards the creek area. The family had the officers wait while they got together their belongings and had the officers escort them from the residence. This isn't the only sighting we have here. The sightings increase every spring and fall. 2-time National Book Award-winning American novelist and nonfiction writer Peter Matheson, in his 1980 edition of In the Spirit of Crazy Horse, quoted many stories from the Oglala Sioux people. The Lakota Western Sioux called the Bigfoot Sheatanka. Shea means elder brother, and Tonka means great or big. Modern Siouans simply use the term big man. C.B. Tench, a prolific 1960s pulp writer for Alcoa Presents, One Step Beyond, published Hoodoo Gold in British Columbia, Death Guard's Lost Creek Mine in 1939. The slewback, of course, was an elderly white man who once lived in the Katzie Indian settlement at the mouth of Pitt Lake, a regional home to a large number of Sasquatch in British Columbia. The Slumac claimed to have discovered the legendary Pit Lake gold deposit at Lost Creek Mine with the aid of the Sasquatch people. If true, that must have been an amazing occurrence. The old Catsey village has been moved to the opposite side of the lake and now lies closer to the northernmost bank of the Fraser River, not too distant from Langley. A region is rife with stories of the Sasquatch and sightings and other interactions with their kind that continue to today. Author Tinch, deeply interested in the Sasquatch, interviewed J.W. Burns, and their exchange is recorded for all time, whereas the rumored interview John Green claimed to have with Burns has yet to be made public, if indeed it ever took place. A vain and often jealous man in his later years, Green's propensity for demeaning and discrediting the work of others in research is not unknown, including any work Burns did, especially his documentation of the Seraphim Long story. Burns, a highly respected Canadian government-paid Indian agent, published a most extensive compilation of early Chehalis First Nation reports derived from the region surrounding and including British Columbia's Morris Mountain. His recordings were uniquely personal between him and his students who lived on the reservation. Beyond acknowledging Burns' use of the term Sasquatch, there was additional terminology attributed to him. He was the first to author the word Saskahawua, an early term he learned from his charges on the Chehalis Indian Reserve, located 60 miles from the city of Vancouver, British Columbia. While Saskahawua is a lesser-known term than Sasquatch, I placed its importance in how it translates, place of the wild men. The Indians of the Saskahawua district called the hair giants Saskahawua Swiki, the giants, it was said, spoke in the Douglas dialect. To that end, Burns penned these words. Indian legends tell of two tribes of Sasquatches who dwelt in this section of the country. They were deadly enemies and practically exterminated one another, fighting hand-to-hand with war clubs on the mountain sides. Skeptics may laugh at the idea of primitive man in the shape of 8-foot giants still living in British Columbia. Nevertheless, I have collected a good deal of evidence tending to prove that the Sasquatch may not be extinct. The importance of that paragraph and its details should not be lost on those in serious research. There may have been others who recorded stories of the haired men in that region, but none so well published as Burns. Who better to know the relationship between the First Nation people and the Sasquatch than a man who lived among them and was trusted by the Chehalis? That Burns' revelations were published probably shocked the straight-laced readers of that era. Unknowingly, Burns clearly helped mold the foundation for hominid understanding about the Sasquatch, and for that we should all be grateful. Despite John Green's attempts to minimize Burns' enormous contributions to Sasquatch research, Burns' great contributions should be acknowledged. Burns, for his part, actually conducted the interviews with the Chehalis he lived among in that day. Conversely, newspaperman Green only served to paraphrase the work Burns had already done. Burns was a resident of the Chehalis soil. Green was not. Who better to know the relationship the Chehalis had with the Sasquatch than John Burns? Burns' written assemblage cornered the market on what was known at the time, and since, regarding the abduction of an Indian maidens and other behaviors unique to the Sasquatch. Above and beyond the determination of Sasquatch DNA, if he hadn't lived among the Chehalis and if he hadn't chronicled the traditions and stories of that time, we would know virtually nothing of Sasquatch behavior in that region. My admiration for Burns' work is noticeable. John Green, on the other hand, went to great lengths to dismiss Burns' contribution, but in truth, the same can be said of Green's 4,000 count database. His card index collection, a copy in my possession since 2002, shows most of those reports were sent to him by other field persons, and some of those entries showed no sign that Green ever investigated all he counted. So exactly how much of the data attributed to and in Green's numbers should be minimized? By my count, I would toss out 40% of Green's index cards where just a couple of second and third-hand sentences are written, lending them unworthy to be counted in the end tally of 4,000, which makes up Green's database. Some of those contributing field investigators in the 50s, 60s, and 70s never had so much as a conversation with Green, yet the details of their data became gospel once in Green's possession. It is suffice to say that Green did not investigate or have personal contact with all the informants listed on these typed and handwritten index cards. There is also no indication in the files that the contributing field persons who sent Green these reports ever investigated the accounts before they were sent off to Green. In fairness, the negative criticism Green launched on Burns can be said of Green, and that was my point, which I intentionally overstated. Mr. Burns recounted a number of well-authenticated stories of encounters with the early wild men who carefully avoided contact with civilization. White men of the day generally thought the wild man extinct. The Chehalis knew otherwise. Perhaps the strangest and most terrifying experience any Indian woman ever had with the Sasquatch was one related by a Chehalis woman named Seraphine Long. At the time Burns interviewed her, Seraphine was very old. She claimed that when she was a young girl, she was kidnapped by a giant Sasquatch and taken to the abode of the hairy monsters for nearly a year. She told Burns the story many times over. He set down her words as accurately as possible. To be continued, and thank you for listening. There would be many parts to the reading of this book. If you like this reading, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification button to be sure to catch the future parts. We welcome comments, but please be considerate of others. If you have had an experience with or about Bigfoot, cryptids, UFO'S, paranormal, or any other strange happenings, and would like to share them on our channel to be read, please email them to sharingofstrangestories@gmail.com. We hope to establish a channel that can provide an outlet for people to speak freely of their experiences without ridicule from others. There are many of us out there that have had these experiences and have faced the ridicule. Emails will be read on our channel, so please keep them family-friendly. If you want to remain anonymous and do not want your name read to the public, please put that at the beginning of the email or in the subject line. Thanks again for listening, and stay safe.